Welcome, everyone. Yeah, we're breaking records this semester. Every forum is our biggest forum yet. So thank you all for being here. So the first thing I want to do is call attention to the flyers that are on your table. The CTL is holding an event by Dr. Robert Talbert next week. He is the author of Grading for Growth, which UGA is with the College of Engineering, EETI, is currently doing a book club for. He does an excellent job of making alternative grading very approachable and focusing it on making sure that the grades we give students help us and our students understand what our students need to work on to master their subjects more effectively. So I strongly recommend going to one of those events. If you're interested, scan the QR code and it'll take you right to the RSVP page. All right, with that out of the way, I would like to introduce our speakers today, and then they will talk about the projects that they're currently doing for the RIEF program, which is an NSF program where experienced engineering education researchers help technical engineering faculty step into the engineering education research space and complete projects that they're passionate about. All right, so Dr. Paul Jensen, if you could raise your hand, is an associate professor of biomedical engineering at the University of Michigan. He leads a research group studying the oral microbiome and teaches classes in linear algebra, machine learning, and automated experiment design. Dr. Kristina Kennedy, if you could raise your hand, is a professor of practice at the Ohio State University's College of Engineering. Following an impactful tenure at Honda Research and Development, she is now a dedicated educator teaching senior design and first-year capstone design courses. She is the faculty director for Ohio State's Integrated Business and Engineering program, which prepares students for leadership roles in industry. And then finally, you may not have met him before, Dr. Fred Beyette is the founding director of the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering in UGA's College of Engineering. Over the past decade, his research has focused on developing point-of-care devices for medical and health monitoring applications. He leads the School of ECE faculty in advancing the college's research enterprise and providing a quality education to students in 2 degree programs, electrical engineering and computer systems engineering. Without further ado, please welcome our speakers. And if you could please give us 1 or 2 sentences about your RIEF project.
Sure. So my RIEF project uses the community cultural wealth framework to look at what assets students bring with them as they enter into and progress through their program of study. Sort of a new wrinkle in my research compared to what's out there in community cultural wealth research is we're also looking at how the faculty view the assets that students bring with them into their program, and then comparing the student perspective with the faculty perspective to hopefully align our curricula and our policies and procedures in the School of ECE to more effectively support our students.
Thank you. My NSF RIEF project is really about understanding career decision for undergraduate students. So I have a background in both engineering and business, and I did a tour of duty in operational excellence at Honda. So process improvement and optimizing experiences is something that really makes me tick. So that's what started my conversations with Dr. Martin on this opportunity. So really, I'm interested and focused on what students are experiencing in their undergraduate education, whether it's inside class, whether it's at a club, whether it's a faculty mentor or an alumni engagement or a speaker, that's really kind of lighting their light bulb above their head and getting them interested in a specific career path. So we are working to understand that so that we can provide more of those light bulb opportunities for our students during their undergrad pathway.
My work with Julie started to look at how AI affects student career outcomes and expectations. So what is it that engineering students feel is different about their job search and their education because there is this AI presence that's picked up. A unique aspect is my 2-year RIEF project started 5 years ago and just finished in August. So it actually started before the latest AI boom and then went through the release of ChatGPT and everything.
And our moderator today will be Dr. Jenny Brown. Jenny, if you could introduce yourself and then get us started.
Hi, certainly. I'm Jenny. I'm Julie's postdoc, and I've been here for 2 years, but I'm not here you want to hear from today. So on the slide back here, I did put up the two RIEF cohorts, I'm going to say. Paul's project was the first chronological cohort, as he mentioned, kind of started back in 2020 something. However, they also had a PhD student who's now a recent PhD graduate work on that project with them. So they kind of worked as a team, as a cluster. And then the current RIEF projects that we're working on as a team, even though they're separate projects, there are some commonalities in their methodologies. And that's being supported by me, Landon, and of course, Dr. Martin. So I'll start off with our first question, and we'll just kind of go down the line if that works, is what inspired you to get involved with engineering education research in general, and then with RIEF specifically?
I'm going to let you start. And
Oh, really?
Promotion. I'm like a laser focused. I want to know what it takes to get to the next level. And I have a high gratitude for this project because I think it was really a tipping point for me in my promotion case that just came through last year from associate professor of practice to full professor of practice. I think NSF RIEF is, thank you. I was looking for yes, thank you, validate me. I think the NSF RIEF program is such a well-known, well-recognized community of practice. And for me, the opportunity to work with someone like Dr. Julie Martin, who has such great expertise and is so well networked in this space, was just a huge interest area for me to learn from someone, a colleague who has a lot to teach and a lot to share from a knowledge perspective.
So I married into it. So my wife is Karen Jensen, who is much infinitely better well-known in the engineering ed space than I am. She's an engineering ed faculty at Michigan. And she had heard me talk for years about, I'm hearing students, even computational students and students who work on machine learning, talk about this existential thing, will I get a job in AI? And it was very strange for me. And finally she said, well, why don't you do something about this? You should study it. You should apply to the RIEF program. She connected me with Julie as a mentor and was the one that said, you should give it a try.
And it's not that I was trying to, pass off my responsibility. I just don't want to be the one that's always answering first. For me, I've been interested in engineering education for a long time and had been, sort of doing different things through the ED forums and the different ED programs for quite some time. When we hired Julie 2 years ago, I approached Julie like probably on her first day saying, I want to do a project. Julie recommended the RIEF program to me, and we almost immediately started working out a project. And, my area of interest was in how do we better support our students, and in particular, our underrepresented students in our programs. And that sort of evolved to talking about the different frameworks that might work in such a study, and sort of led us into writing the proposal that ultimately got funded. So.
All right, thank you. And so with my next question, as John mentioned, the NSF RIEF program is a mentored research experience where you, as an engineering faculty member with expertise in your disciplinary field, are learning to do engineering education research with an expert in either social science or engineering education like Dr. Martin. So I'd like to start with Paul for this one because chronologically you're first as well. How has that mentoring experience been for you so far?
Oh, so we have a paper on this. So part of our project was to do an autoethnography on the mentoring relationship, which was unique because it was this tripartite mentoring because we had Deepthi, who was a PhD student. So I was technically Deepthi's advisor. I have no clue what I'm doing, which is an odd thing to say as someone's PhD advisor because I was brand new to engineering ed. So there's a paper you can read that goes into great detail, all the things that we found. I want to tell you a story how this started. So my wife connected me with Julie, and by happenstance, I was visiting the NSF to talk with program officers. And so I met the program officers in charge of the RIEF, and I had my one-pager set, and I said, I'm pitching this RIEF project. It ended up being very different than the project we settled on. And he read it over and said, I think that's very interesting. He said, who did you have in mind for your mentor? And I said, Julie. And then I realized that I actually didn't know Julie's last name. Karen had always said you should work with Julie, and I had talked with Julie, and she had agreed. I just said Julie, and I froze nervously. And he says, Martin? And I thought at this moment, like, good heavens, she's like Cher. You say Julie, and people just know the last name, like who exactly you're talking about. I was like, yes, Julie Martin. That'd be fantastic. So it was getting connected just by happenstance, but then being in a spot where you're working with someone who is very well known in the field and people know them, and you're brand new, and you have another person who's depending on you for advising. That project, I think, taught me more about being an advisor in all contexts than being an engineering education researcher. So I still got a lot out of the engineering ed aspect, but I learned more about mentorship from this project because there was the autoethnographic component.
So I think the interesting thing that's different, or one of the interesting things that's different between Paul's project and Kristina and my project is that Paul's project was handled as kind of a standalone project. Kristina and my projects, when we wrote the proposal, we were very upfront about there's a lot of overlap and interconnection between these projects. And so when both projects were funded, it kind of created a super project with a very diverse group of people, right? And our group meets every week. And it's the mentoring aspects of the proposal are some of the most interesting parts of it, right? Julie, obviously, world-renowned researcher in engineering education, right? I'm a department head, and yet Landon knows more about engineering education research than I do. Landon is a former student in electrical engineering. So there's this kind of interesting mentoring dynamic that happens sometimes where I'm looking to Landon to give me mentoring, and he's looking to me to give him mentoring in other aspects of his professional development. So I think that the mentoring dynamic that happened because the two programs came together has been very, very interesting. For me personally, the mentoring relationship has been part of the most interesting part of doing this project. I've got 30 plus years of experience as a faculty member. I've mentored graduate students for decades, and yet being able to sit back and watch the way that Julie mentors the different people in our team, including me, her postdoc, a graduate student, and see how she morphs that mentoring interaction depending on the person that she's interacting with. It's really taught me a lot about mentoring and made me really think a lot more about the importance of mentoring, not only for our students, but for our fellow faculty members and everybody else in the organization.
I'll add only a little bit because I'll say ditto to what Fred has said already. But I think one of the things that I really love about the way that Julie approaches mentoring is, even though she's in many ways the content expert or the SME of our project, whenever one of us mentees has a question for her, she'll point to the rest of the mentoring team. So shout out to Landon, who's back there on our team. Shout out to Jenny, who are giving us their wise counsel as well. So it's not that Julie is like the end all be all, but she has the answer, but she also engages the rest of the mentoring team in a meaningful way so that we're actually learning from all of the members of our team collectively, which I think is really fun and really cool. So that's been one thing that's been a standout for me.
Yes, absolutely. And I can also add the early career aspect of this. It's been amazing working on a team with such advanced scholars and established scholars, especially Kristina getting her industry background is really fascinating to me. I've learned a lot from her. In her interviewing style that she brought from Honda is very different from what I'm used to in research interviews, but there's elements of it that I thought were really useful that I'm now putting in my own interviews because it just made it much more conversational and get at the information that we needed a lot better. So it's been great to work with this team. So this question will be for Kristina and Fred, because of the nature of this, of the mentoring that we do, we have an individual meeting, but then we have an individual meeting with each PI and the rest of the team, and then we also have the full team meeting. So out of curiosity, what do you think about this group mentoring dynamic versus the one-on-one? Are there certain things that you think are really useful in having one-on-ones versus the group mentoring?
You know, I think that every interaction has its own unique things that are really interesting. You know, when we're meeting with just Team Fred, we can really drill down into the specifics of the framework that I'm working with and the nuances of the situation in my project. But, you know, part of the nature of a RIEF project is it's a relatively small amount of money. It's just a 2-year project. And so you have kind of a limited number of interviews that you can conduct. I've been pretty fortunate. I've got to the end of my interviewing plans, and I haven't had any interviews that were like really out there, right? Kristina, on the other hand, had an interview that was just like crazy. And for us to be able to sit down as a team and talk about how that interview went and, you know, thinking about, okay, well, we don't know what's going on because we're still new to interviewing, but to be able to get the guidance from the whole team, that was a really valuable experience that we wouldn't have had, or that I wouldn't have had, if we weren't also doing this larger team kind of thing. So I think both ways of interacting have been tremendously valuable to my development as an engineering education researcher.
Good answer. I'll add to that. I think the individual meetings are really important for me because it gives me a little bit of safety in that I can ask the stupid questions, because I do ask a lot of entry level questions because I'm new to this engineering education research space. So a bit of more maybe safety there. And then I love the group meetings because I find it interesting to kind of know where Fred is in his research and to understand maybe if he sees a roadblock ahead that, oh, I'm going to be like tuned in to that potential roadblock on my side. So I think it's nice that we have that, even though we're running separate programs, some of the process is similar. So it's nice to know as like a heads up, hey, I saw this, you might look out for it. So I think it's nice to have that community to build off of each other and learn from each other as well.
Unless you want Paul to jump in on that.
This one I have for Paul to start, if you're up for it. What expectations did you have coming into the RIEF program originally, and how have those aligned with your actual experiences?
Yeah, I really didn't know what to expect, to be honest, and that turned out to be correct. So I think one of the things that surprised me is there's a lot of things that you learn from doing a project in engineering education, and I thought it would be good to have those skills in case you wanted to do engineering education work. What I didn't plan on is that so many of those skills were going to transfer back into my work in like as an AI researcher and as a microbiologist. There's a much bigger transfer that way than there is the transfer the other way. There's very few skills as a microbiologist that I could leverage working in engineering education research. So that's I view the big success for me out of the RIEF program was just skills development as things I've learned about mentoring, things I've learned about qualitative research, about interviewing, about collecting data in very unstructured environments. All those things have been used in other parts of my research program, and that was not an expectation. I always viewed it that this was going to be a separate thing. And that is asymmetric. There's so little that I was able to carry over as an engineering researcher into the engineering ed space. That was also sort of a surprise.
So just to remember, this is a how it started, how it's going kind of a question. Okay, so I've joked with Julie about this offline, but when we originally made our budget and we had to say like 2 weeks of summer salary to fund this project or something ridiculously low, it was a lot more time than I expected. And I hope everyone else is laughing at that too, because there's a big time commitment necessary, several hours per week and not just 2 hours in the summer. I came into it not really knowing what to expect. I was really hoping to find like, what are these golden nuggets of things that we're doing in the undergraduate world that are really influencing students and helping them make a career decision. I mean, we haven't finished the project yet, so we haven't quite gotten there, but the unexpected thing I'm getting out of this is seeing Julie as a mentor and seeing the way that she mentors, I think is helping me as a capstone instructor, because learning from her and her best practices, right? Like I said earlier, instead of her giving me the answer, she'll ask the full team first, like, what do you think? What do you think? And then she'll build if the answer is not totally there. I've taken that approach in Capstone. One of the things we did early on in our RIEF project is we did a leadership assessment tool to understand everyone's strengths and potential weaknesses. I started launching that in my Capstone class as well, so that students on teams could start to get to know each other a bit better on a different level. So there are things that we've done from a methods perspective that I've started to test out in the classes that I teach, which has been a lot of fun and definitely unexpected.
So what was I expecting? I was expecting to really dig in and understand the situation for my students. And I've done that. What I wasn't expecting was all the stuff that's happened around mentoring, all the stuff that's happened around building my skill set and my confidence levels in this area. You know, after nearly 30 years of being a researcher, I felt pretty confident in my ability to do research and to manage things like progress reports and that kind of stuff. The level of thought that goes into engineering education research was really a surprise to me, and learning that I can learn to do that, you know, that I'm being successful in completing a project. I think that's an outcome that, you know, the way that it has changed my confidence in the research, I think has been the biggest surprise for me.
Thank you. And I know that several of you have touched on this before, but sorry. But now that you've done, you're deeply into your RIEF projects, how has doing these RIEF projects impacted how you approach your roles as faculty or as department head?
I'll go down here to start.
Last
Okay, I mean, I think I answered this a little bit before, but some of the methodologies from this project, like I said, leadership assessment at the front end of a capstone class, for example, to give everyone insights on, you know, who's bringing what to the table. I think that's been an interesting experiment for me. One of the things with regard, I have a lot of quantitative research experience during my days at Honda. Like, it was all numbers, very black and white. Qualitative is very gray and not as, you know, it doesn't click as well for me. But learning about some of the best practices in interviewing has been really interesting for me. And it's something that I've then translated into my capstone class. Like, for example, this sounds really basic to everyone in the room, but don't ask a question that could have just a yes, no answer. Try to build out your questions in a more robust way so that you can get more detail, ask why a lot of times. So I'm baking some of those best practices into my capstone class, where students are required to talk to end users and SMEs throughout their project to build out something. So that's been nice to have kind of those best practices that I could interject into my class directly and see how they're impacting our students.
So I think one of the things that I'm sort of taking out of doing this work is, understanding the interpersonal dynamics that happen in interviewing and how that impacts what's going on in the conversation. So, being a department head and trying to interview members of your faculty or students in your program, I really have become keenly aware of how my position as a department head influences the dynamic of the conversation. And like Kristina said, recognizing those things, thinking about the way you frame questions, knowing when to say, and what else, or can you give me an example of that? Carrying some of that understanding of those dynamics then into the way I interact with my faculty in my role as a department head, or as I interact with my students in the department head of the department that they're pursuing a degree in, has sort of made my interactions with those people richer, because I'm starting to apply those same kinds of conversational techniques in the way I interact with my faculty and students.
So I work in biomedical engineering, and I think when we're talking about students in education, there's sort of this undercurrent of, if you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't be a biomedical engineer because someone's going to get hurt. Like if you're putting a medical device in or on someone, it has to be designed correctly, and that you need expertise before you're even allowed to practice. Everyone in my family teaches. They're all K-12 educators, and they tease me that we all teach, but I'm the only one that doesn't hold a license to actually teach. And I think it's become very apparent working a little bit in engineering ed that, a lot of my job is as a mentor, and a lot of my job is as an educator. And for whatever reason, I don't think we have the same idea that if you don't know what you're doing, you shouldn't do it because someone might get hurt. And I think if we have people that don't know how to be mentors, someone's going to get hurt by that. That's a very important job. And there's a lot that the engineering ed community knows about mentoring and can help us assess about mentoring, just in the same way that, being a registered professional engineer is a stamp of quality, and we need to start adopting that. That's very important, and the outcomes are, in a lot of cases, just as critical.
Right. Thank you for that thoughtful answer. So then kind of looking towards the future, how would you describe your future ideas for EER, or what are your plans for EER, your work in EER? Engineering Education Research, apologies.
So my first plan is to complete this RIEF project and actually publish something out of this RIEF project. I've begun to realize that the idea that I first took to Julie on her first day was like way too big of a problem to handle in one project. And I'm not sure what the next project is. It'll be informed by the work that I'm doing in my RIEF project. But I certainly now have a passion for continuing to look at what are the needs of students, how do faculty interact with those needs, where are they aligned, where are they misaligned, and how can we more effectively as a unit improve the opportunities for success of our students. And I'm sure there are more projects in there somewhere.
Agree with you, Fred. I'd like to finish this project strong and not have multiple no-cost extensions like some people. But a publishing obviously would be an interesting, talking about the project externally. But I really think that this has like kind of lit a fire under me, and I really enjoy like this qualitative research space. So I am eyes wide open, ears wide open, looking for the next opportunity. I'd love to spool something else up. And again, I'd love for it to be around student success and, career journey, I think is a very interesting piece for me. So I can study, what helps my students and also what pushes them in the direction that they want to go. So my eyes are open.
I think whether it was premonition or not, Julie from the beginning would ask me periodically, what's the plan when the RIEF ends? How is this going to become a thing? And over the course of the period, I think it became clear that I was not going to have a separate engineering ed research component in my research. It wasn't, I wasn't able to do both. I don't have the bandwidth. But now, as part of our AI work, we have an exchange program where 2 students from a rural serving institution come and intern in our lab over the summer. But those students, they do reflections, they fill out a mentoring plan, we have exit interviews, we talk with them, we do the same thing we did with participants in our RIEF study. And I think that type of thing where we have good ways to assess the educational quality of our other programs, that's going to be what continues on out of our RIEF project. That's going to be the next step for us.
And I know it sounds like we're giving Paul a really hard time here, but he actually just got a paper published. We got the news a couple days ago that he got accepted into the International Journal of STEM Education. And then that's also a really important piece I wanted to ask you about, Paul, if you wouldn't mind, is how can you see a faculty kind of continuing to engage in engineering education research without necessarily having to do a full RIEF project? And if anyone else has any thoughts.
I think the number one thing is you have to get help. You need to engage with someone before the project starts and say, how are you going to do this project? And I teach stats to undergrads, and there's a quote by Ronald Fisher that says, after the data are collected, all the statistician can do is perform an autopsy to see what the experiment died of. It is too late if you said, I've already taught the class, I've already designed my survey, I've already collected the data. There's a right way to do that, and then there's a million wrong ways. And I wouldn't try and do an educational thing again unless I talk to someone to just say, here's what I'm thinking about. What do I need to be aware of? My wife does a lot of quantitative research and survey design, and she'll point out things in surveys we have to take, internal surveys at Michigan, and said, well, see, this is a poorly worded question because of this, and this is problematic. It's leading because of this thing. And I would never have imagined that that's going to be an issue and they're not going to get good data from having this. So ask early. Even if you're going to be doing the project or you think there's a project there, they can tell you yes, no, oh, you should do this instead.
While Paul was talking, made me think of something that Julie said early on when we started discussing the potential for RIEF. And I was bringing here all these like wild ideas that were like all over the place. And she was like, you have to pick a project that you're really excited about and really interested in learning the answer to. And I think that was the key for me. Like, I've never really been pushed on that before. It's like, oh, let's do this. And when I worked in industry, it was like, this is your next project. Go get started. It doesn't matter if you want to work on it or if you're behind it or you buy into it. And so for this, it was really about finding something that really was exciting for me. And I love that she gave me that advice. I think that was like the most critical advice early on, to find something that you're really excited about, that you really want to know the answer to. So I just wanted to share that.
So I'll put my comments more in the framework of we're all here at UGA. The reason that I got interested in doing engineering education research, well, that's not true. I was always been interested in engineering education research. The reason that I actually got started doing engineering education research was because of EETI and this community that is so supportive of not just doing formal engineering education research, but doing all kinds of little projects to figure out how we could do better for our students. We could do better as teams of educators and whatnot. And so it's being involved in this community that has enabled me to go on this journey where I'm actually now conducting an engineering education research project. I can't stress enough how important it is, like the others have said, engage with a community and engage with problems that are interesting to you. And we are blessed here at UGA to have EETI and EETI to support all of the work that we're doing in this space to support our students.
All right, thank you for that. Yes, EETI is an incredibly unique community, and I don't think I've found a more supportive one for engineering education research. So with that, those are the end of our scheduled questions. So now I'd like to open up questions from the audience, and if you'd like, I can bring you the microphone. Do we have any questions?
Oh, don't be bashful.
So, was everybody, were you, all of you doing qualitative research? Yeah. All three of you? That's really special.
Yes.
Our project is.
I'm saying, are all RIEF projects qualitative research with interviews? Yeah. But these were.
No, so I originally pitched doing a quantitative one because I'm a computational biologist. And I brought this to Julie and I said, here's my project. I want to do a survey and I want to do this analysis. And she said, this looks like a great project. And I would be happy to find you someone else to be your mentor for it. Because if you're, she said, I'll connect you with someone, but that's not, I'm a qualitative researcher. And so I had to decide, like, do I want to do this project or do I want to work with Julie? And I decided to work with Julie on it. It's interesting that my wife and I are flipped, that I'm a computational biologist. She was much more of an experimental biologist, but she's a quantitative engineering ed researcher and I'm a qualitative engineering ed researcher. So there's a switch on that. But my wife had a RIEF and hers was a quantitative one on survey design. So.
So we talked about how can folks get involved in engineering ed research without pursuing a RIEF. I would actually like to know the opposite because I think there's been an uptick in interest in the college of pursuing RIEFs. So for a faculty who might be interested in eventually pursuing a RIEF, what preparatory work would you suggest to get ready for that opportunity?
So I guess there's a lot of different things you can do to get prepped, right? Certainly being engaged in EETI. For me, it was doing a small project through the incubator that really got me to start thinking about, okay, well, there's a process to doing this kind of research. And then it was meeting different people within the community and finding those relationships that I could build on to get to a funded project, and that funded project happened to be a RIEF project. So, you know, yeah, there was, I can't remember if I got seed grant money or I've been associated with several projects, some of which have gotten seed grant funding through EETI.
I would talk to someone who's done a RIEF project before. I was lucky that a couple of the members of my department back at Ohio State had done RIEF, and I knew Julie had been a mentor. So I started by chatting with them about what their projects were all about, what they entailed, what it took to stand up a project. I'll raise my hand if anyone wants to chat with me. I'm happy to talk with you about what RIEF looks like. Obviously, you've got Dr. Martin here, who's a local expert, and her team. But I think any of us are probably willing to also have a conversation. I think talking to someone who's in it or has recently completed it might be a good first step.
So I would say 90% of it is the mentoring plan. So when they're reviewing the RIEF applications, there's the project, and the project is important, but it's a training program for faculty. So there is lots of scrutiny placed on the mentorship plan. And so that's something you need to work with someone on, because writing, you know, how I used to write mentorship plans for postdoc fellowships for students is very different. Like, what is your mentorship model? What's the theoretical framework behind your mentorship? What are the citations behind it? All these things that Julie helped me write in my mentorship plan. We got the reviews back and I said, the mentorship plan is absolutely fantastic. And oh yes, there's a project too. And one of the reviews said they're going to develop a certificate program in AI. And I said, that's not even the project. Like, that's not even the right project. So the scrutiny is on how is this going to make an engineering ed researcher more than the project itself.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So thank you all so much for this really cool panel. So the RIEF, the Research Initiation in Engineering Formation program, is often described as a PI learning to do engineering education research, but I think it also has to be said that you have to come in with strong assets toward your questions and like, so how would you describe I think we've been talking a lot about ways that you've learned and ways that you've shifted a paradigm, but how did you come in ready to do these projects before, as you were starting it?
Not everyone all at once.
And this is like super micro detail. Thank you for the question. Thank you for spelling out what RIEF is, because I still get tripped up on that after a year of this project. But one of the things that I brought to the table was strong industry engagement. Obviously, coming from industry, working with Capstone, I've got a lot of sponsors. So I knew I had a really ripe pool of people to choose from to bring in to serve as our external advisory board. I think that was really important because that was a piece of what we put together. I think everyone has an external advisor. I'm not sure if that's a requirement. Maybe I see a hand shaking. So having a strong group of people that I knew I could tap into for that purpose was good. I've been mentored, through industry, and I've been in mentoring and mentee programs. So I've seen it from a different perspective. So kind of having that experience, I think, helped me understand what we wanted to do with our mentoring plan. So having been a mentor and a mentee, I came in with that perspective as well to help us kind of frame that mentoring relationship. I know Julie gave a lot of great feedback on that. Because I oversee a program of, nearly 300 undergrad students, I knew I had easy access to those students, meaning that I could tap them for interviews and to survey them. And I knew if they saw my name on email, they may respond, they may not auto-delete me, but having that student base that you have a strong relationship with made it easier for me, I think, to secure interviews and to get into that voice of the customer for my project.
Yeah, I think, you kind of have to understand that, coming into this from being a technical researcher, that there's more to what you're doing as a faculty member than your technical expertise. I think a lot of times that's not true, right? A lot of faculty, they're focused a lot on the nuances of their technical research space, and they know they have to teach and they know they have to mentor graduate students, but they're not really cued into there's a whole nother level of things that are happening in a university. And a lot of it is kind of, it's always been treated as kind of magic. But there's actually a lot of thought and a lot of nuance that goes into it. And you have to kind of be open to that. And open to those kinds of questions, right? And if you want to work with Julie, you got to be open to the idea that you're not going to send out a survey. You're going to sit down and interview people and do a whole different kind of research. We often joke about, here I am, later stages of my academic career, and the last year to me has felt like being a graduate student all over again, because it's being exposed to a whole different way of thinking that I never was used to working in before. And so I think coming into these kinds of projects, you really have to be open to that's part of what the experience is going to be like. And in order to get the most out of it, you have to be willing to embrace it.